Good evening and welcome back to the Real Truth channel. Well, that didn't end very well, did it? We had what I've been banging on about on other channels for about 2.5 months, saying that Zaporizhzhia was indeed always the target of the Ukrainian army, and that was absolutely 100%. I have it on good authority, and the people who know me know who my sources are. I have it on very good authority, and had it on good authority that the F-16s were going to be given to Ukraine, but only if they made Zaporizhzhia their number one target. Now, what you have to remember here is that the Americans very much want control of that nuclear power plant back. NATO wanted Crimea, and for the ethnic cleansers, very much a symbolic place was Bakhmut. That didn't turn out too well, with Ukraine trying to hold on to that place for as long as possible, having 8 years to build defences there. And in a matter of months, when the serious Russian army turned up, it fell fairly quickly. When you consider how many Ukrainian troops were lost there, even the BBC now is admitting the absolute nonsense that the Russians lost hundreds of thousands of men. The latest count I have is just over 34,000. What you have to remember is the missing have to be counted in amongst the dead, and some of the people who repatriate the bodies are friends of mine, and I have to say that they do a wonderful job in the most god-awful of circumstances. It is very, very difficult sometimes to get the correct figure. The correct figure will not be known for a while, because you have to sift through the rubble, and then there are the surrounding areas where you find bodies, sometimes in war zones all over the place. And trust me, having seen some of the places where you can find bodies is quite daunting and quite horrible to behold. The other thing that we have to talk about here is the lunacy of launching a counteroffensive into Zaporizhzhia on 4 or 5 different fronts, and losing a fifth of your tank, 5% of your tanks. They only had 200 to 300 to start with, and they lost quite a few already. So that took them down to about 260, 250, and they lost quite a few there. You can't afford to lose that many tanks in the space of a couple of hours. And this tells you what happens when they fully launch completely, if they're ever going to. What we have to remember is the spring offensive we were promised is no longer a spring offensive, it's now a summer offensive. Something tells me that the autumn might be an offensive. This was a counter-offensive, but I don't think it's the big one that they're all talking about. This was Zaporizhzhia. This was the reason for being able to get, as I say, the F-16s. That was always part of the deal. Let's be under no illusions whatsoever about that. The other thing you have to say is the lunacy of launching this counter-offensive with tanks without air support and not being able to own the skies. This, as we've been saying on other channels for a good few months, is a totally different type of warfare. First of all, the savagery of it has not been seen since World War I or World War II in Stalingrad. It really is of that level. Some of the butchery and some of the videos and the barbarity that I've seen is quite staggering. And certainly when I was in a war zone, I never saw anything of this level. What I would also say is the nonsense that's been spouted by us in the West when we have turned around and said that Ukraine were winning. They never were. When Ukraine made all those wonderful advances, you have to remember they were up against the Donetsk and the Luhansk People's Republican Army, which is slightly different from the Russian army. And then eventually the real Russian army turned up. When an opponent can outmatch you in production, which it can, when an opponent can outmatch you in the rate of fire, which it can, and when your opponent can outmatch you in numbers, which it can, I don't know which part of that war that you think you're going to win. It has always been a fool's errand. It will continue to be a fool's errand. We'll continue to back it in the West. And of course, they'll impose even more sanctions and give even more money, which will just impact on ordinary citizens around the world. with your food prices and your gas prices going through the roof. You don't seriously believe that if we only got 5 or 6% of our gas from Russia, that we needed to put gas prices up here in Britain to over 200%. Anybody who thinks that is not really at the races. The other thing that you have to say about this absolute lunacy, including giving the Ukrainians depleted uranium shells, which then 50% of them got annihilated, and we ended up with a huge mushroom cloud, is the lack of accountability by anyone for this. There is no doubt whatsoever that this was pushed by the USA, and the deaths of all those young men are definitely on American hands there. There is something, or must be something, to do with that nuclear power plant, that holding back the F-16s until they launch counter-offensive at Zaporizhzhia, and nobody's being fooled by the Belgorod incursions, and quite what they think they're doing there is beyond me. Outside of the West, the rest of the world is horrified that they are targeting and shelling civilians on purpose. It's one thing to kill civilians, or they get in the way, or as an accident, or they just happen to be there when the bomb went off. It's another thing entirely to target them on purpose as terrorist attacks. And let's face it, 9/11 was a terrorist attack. Chicago was a terrorist attack. When you start targeting civilians, it's a terrorist attack. It's that simple. When you target them on purpose, that is a terrorist attack. And the other thing that you have to look at during this war, as well as them losing over 250 men, 12 tanks and 31 armoured vehicles, I'm reliably informed, and also quite a few pieces of artillery. The Russians were completely expecting this, and they're just laying traps all over the place. And whoever's in charge or goading on the Ukrainian armed forces to go and get slaughtered, this is only going to get worse. If you cannot rule the skies, tanks are no use. This is a totally different type of war as well, and people are still stuck in the old wars of 3 attackers will get killed for every defender. No, they won't. Not with the new artillery and the drones and everything else. They can hit defensive positions, missiles. They can hit defensive positions. Ukraine lost about 10 soldiers to every one in Bakhmut. On the battlefield, it's about 8 to 1 that they're losing. That's not sustainable. When you have a first-class army of 500,000 soldiers and you've lost nearly 300,000 already, and then you're looking at maybe only 30, 40, maybe 50,000 soldiers for a counter-offensive, to keep wasting it and to keep having your ammo blown up. The Ukrainians only have enough ammo to launch a counter-offensive for a week, and then they run out. It's that simple. The Russians can outmatch them for firepower. And the people who are running this war on behalf of Ukraine, on behalf of NATO, and on behalf of America are absolutely fine sitting where they're sitting because they don't see the consequences of this. They should be suing for peace. They should give Putin what he wants. They had a chance to do this. And then suddenly there was a visit from Boris Johnson and peace was off the table. And Zelenskyy is in between a rock and a hard place because he had, on the one hand, his own command, which are full of these ethnic cleansing lunatics, what I would call nationalist ideologues. They very much wanted to hold on to Bakhmut, and Zelenskyy had to go along with it. Also pushing from the other side was the Americans to get the counter-offensive underway. There were 1 or 2 in the Ukrainian high command or war cabinet who were against this, saying that the counter-offensive couldn't succeed and wanted to draw back. The problem for Zelenskyy is, for one, he tried peace, and secondly, he then made a phone call to Xi Jinping trying to sue for peace. It is no doubt whatsoever that he's now back in the fold and is being worked by his masters. And anybody who looks at this guy sees a man who is utterly lost in something that has overtaken him completely. And it's all over YouTube. You only have to go and look at some of the videos that are around. The Ukrainian army and young men are getting the pasting. There are videos out there on YouTube that you can go and look at of Ukrainian men being thrown and forcibly made to go to the front. And the nonsense that Zelenskyy came out with, that there are queues and queues of people getting ready to go into this fight, are absolute nonsense. The Russians definitely did. They had over 300,000. They've got saved back in the rear. Ukraine have, at best, 150,000 troops left, and there are now mercenaries like Polish mercenaries, Georgian forces going in to supplement what Ukraine have. There are many, many mercenaries and many misguided people from different places going in to fight this war. It's a shame, because when they catch up with them, and trust me, I have it on very good authority that the people are currently shelling Belgorod are in for a very rude awakening in a few weeks' time if this continues. I think shelling civilians is an absolutely stupid idea. It does nothing but really create a little bit of terror amongst the people who live there. It is not going to be a good long-term strategy for getting rid of Putin. Putin is more popular than any Western leader out there, and his popularity is only going to grow because of this. And the idiotic idea that Blinken would turn around and say that I am Russia's friend in a speech he did recently is probably the most vomit-inducing nonsense you could possibly hear. And there's not one Russian who believes him for 1 second. Thank you very much for listening.